We record, yeah, recording. All right. So, hi everybody. I'm with Emilio. This is Thomas. So this is a surprise. Daniel doesn't know this. Daniel from OG Rose. Daniel Gardner recently and Michelle Gardner recently published Belonging Again, Part One, an explanation. And it is kind of this tome of one of their major projects on discussing the current social cultural condition. And basically, a month ago, I coordinated with some other colleagues to secretly purchase the book. Well, they found out we bought the book, but after spend the month reading the book, taking our notes, and then convene together a month later to do a basically review of Belonging Again and our reflections and meditations on it as a sign of gratitude and thank you to the Gardners for their generosity, magnanimity, and generosity in the online philosophy space. I think everyone here who's part of this recording, and maybe some people couldn't make it for conflict of schedule, but still read the book, all have a really deep relationship and deep fondness for the Gardners. So before we get started, I just want to say thank you to the Gardners for such being great people and to their welcoming part of the community online. So with that, I have Emilio here. So we're going to riff off first. Some members might join this call in progress, so we'll just riff on that. And Emilio, please we'll start the conversation on, share with me your reflections on the text. We'll take it from there.
Well, for me, the text is like in general was like reading it was interesting because it was like familiar but strangely new, because like some of the things that like the book explores, like the malices, like the things you feel like so familiar because they are so entrenched in our day and age, but also like new in the sense that you can take like a different spin on them. So I thought it was like really interesting. Like in some parts they were almost like putting words for like my feelings or my thoughts. I really appreciated that. And I think, well, of course we're going to delve deeper, but I think it's like really important. As we go through, I may have some personal anecdotes that may like kind of correlate to the text in a fun way. But yeah, I just belonging again, as the title implies, it's just like I don't know, like we've seen this phenomenon like from like a couple decades now, that like people like spurs out, like they don't have as much close friends anymore, they don't trust them, like they are not as sociable, like the famous book like Bowling Alone. Like we see this phenomenon happening, and we obviously like don't want that, but how do we go about it, right? How do we approach it? What are the lens, the ideas that are practically as how can we see the subject, so we can approach it in a way that is actually beneficial, right? So like this is the first part of like Belonging Again, part one, and I think it's about understanding and conceptualizing the problem in a way that makes it useful for them to take like action. Okay, so I think that was my brief on the text.
Yeah, summary of the text. Yeah. So the idea is that in a space of kind of cultural atomization, right, that becoming more and more isolated, more individual, and all the cultural infrastructures, religion, family, governments, that in schools and other parts of society of common life that organize our lives are rapidly decaying or basically falling apart. This is leading to a great sense of crisis for individuals, kind of the mental health crisis, meeting crisis, all these different symptoms of a deep kind of loss of belonging, as the Gardners basically work through the text, talk about, both describing the kind of parallel move of a kind of technocratic givens, that basically the givens that move from locals who move to more abstracted national or international or just general abstractional direction. There's still the contingent preferences of individuals and how that gets mediated, and a general kind of attitude or relationship epistemology-wise, and epistemology with each other, of disbelief that nothing can be given. We have to be critical and suspicious, have a kind of a mode of suspicion with everything we run into in the world. So these are the context behind what's motivating the gardeners to write this text. And as you said, Emilio, this first text is diagnosis. 400 pages of diagnosis. It's definitely thorough. We got to give it credit. And by the way, I have a comment that the footnotes themselves are like are its own 150 pages.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's like a full text
It's yeah, yeah.
reading the footnotes in Daniel, Michelle. Um, so it's certainly systematic in its attempt to try to address or at least identify the diagnosis of what this problem is. Emilio, you said before there were some things that were said. Actually, I think Sam saying this too online. There were moments. It's funny. This was meant to be a very kind of diagnostic overview, but yet it was for a lot of people. They've been sensing a lot of individual, like, oh, I experienced that too.
Yeah.
Can you give an example? I heard you say that before. Can you give me an example of that?
Like it's like, for example, you like just like a general feeling, in the sense that, for example, you go through life and you have your friends and your family and stuff, and it's weird because if you don't place like the historical context, you might think that it's always been this way, but like so many things have changed in like the last 100 years. And for me, it was just like a general feeling, because I have friends, but like they like, normally if you had friends like and you lived in the same town, you stayed with that friends like until you grew old, right? But like now, like each of us went to different schools in like different parts of the country, so you feel like if you did belong somewhere, like those friends like spread out, right? So you don't, like, it's not, you don't have anywhere to go back to, because like all the uh, like the where you belong is just like dispersed in stuff. And for me, it's been an interesting juxtaposition, like specifically because like I feel very fortunate that I have friends that I consider close friends, and I really trust, and I so that's kind of like that anchors, that means that you belong somewhere, in a sense. So that's like that calms down the existential anxiety that the books delves into. So I think that's really cool. But also, like, as I said, those friends like disperse, so you still have this like tension, right, to where they belong. And then I recently moved to Mexico City to university, and then I didn't know anyone there, just like a couple of friends from my campus also transferred. So it was like really interesting to make like whole new connections and just find your place to belong in like an institution, right? But also like in a community, and also like in a group of friends, and in like the different social dynamics. So it was like almost, it was like a really interesting time to read it, because I was making that transition, and for me it became really obvious that like the givens and releases, because like you almost don't have anything for given, right? Because um I had like I went to my class the first day, I didn't know anyone, and just by some random luck, I was assigned to group number one, like, well, to the team number one, because you like, it's very like collaborative, like the things we do. So you always like all the homework and stuff is between your team. And I was fortunate enough that that team was like it was like really cool people and stuff. So it was like really nice. So you also find like, okay, like I have a group of friends, I belong and stuff, right? So that's like a really nice thing. And then, but you maybe see that that's contingent on like some stuff, that it's not, you cannot rely on it, in the sense that you like in that invisible given, right? Because if for example, if we change like in this new semester, like maybe we have like different schedules, so we are not going to be in the same class. So maybe like if that friendship is going to like stay or not, like if it's going to like deepen, or if it's going to fade away. And you see that we don't have anything given anymore. In that type of sense, you don't have any space, you don't have like a continuity, because before givens, if you went to church, like the same people went to church every Sunday, right? So you have like this given, this space where you could find this existential tranquility. But now it's always changing, always change. You might not belong there, because it might change or morph, or maybe you stay with one friend of two in the class, but the others are in a different schedule, and you have all your other friends like spread out through the whole country. And I think those are like the most like down to earth, like lived things, like implications that I've lived through, that this, I think this is text describes too, because it's everywhere. And like even like some stuff that was maybe given, if you live in a certain place and you were in a community, like you could say like I am part of this community, but now even that can be taken away from you in a way. So it's just like you belong nowhere, because you could belong everywhere theoretically, but then it becomes like a weird thing. So yeah, it's weird, because like there's no common ground anymore, and like the common ground that exists like sometimes fades away. So yeah, it's interesting to where can we belong again, given like all these moving parts of society and systems and life. So yeah, that's kind of that my experience in
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, actually, this part in our summary, we kind of skipped over this, right? There's a section about cosmopolitanism, right? And the
Yeah.
idea that, right, partly because of the rapidity and speed and distance of travel, right? And most people, for most of their lives, lived in the neighborhood, probably within a 10-mile radius of where they grew up for
Yeah.
most of human history. That has changed. That used to be only a privilege of the rich, of a very esteemed class that would travel, right, either for war, or for exploration or discovery, for example. So this was always a demarcator of a certain kind of status and class of person. This has been shifted now to basically everybody. Everybody's been. So one of the things that is one of the most common experiences now is this rapidity, is this kind of radical distance traveling. So people are not staying in one location for most of their lives. In fact, one of the measures of economic activity is actually how much moving happens. I remember seeing this in economics class. So that's definitely a dynamic we're talking about together. So it's in the so that's one of the mechanisms that is resulting in this kind of loss of givens, because you don't have your group of friends and family and relationships that you had all your life. And especially if you're traveling, I mean, the basic pretense, if you're a renter, you don't have any stakes in the game in your house when you're living in the community. You own the house, you do have incentives, just on that factor. So being a renter versus a homeowner has already plays that dynamic out. But I'm just saying, because if you're constantly moving and traveling, you're not buying a house, you're renting. So it just built on this argument or case that most people don't know who their neighbors are. Like especially in apartment buildings, that's a very common problem. You have no idea who your neighbors are. Nobody. So that's all. So this is all kind of painting the picture of what, in the face of this, how are we going to navigate a society that would, if those are all true, what Daniel and Michelle are arguing in the text is that there's a tendency to want authoritarian overpressing, right? So the ways to contain the contradictions and uncertainties that this kind of radical just loss of givens is going to do, of mass transit, cosmopolitanism, radical skepticism of any political, social, moral stance. How will society organize itself to be coherent in any way? The argument by the Gardeners, to my understanding, is one of the dangers potentially is an authoritarian kind of overpressing of victims. It's not stated in the text explicitly, but I'm thinking of COVID the entire time.
Okay, that's a good one. Yeah.
As I was reading it. Yeah, what are your thoughts about that, Emilio?
It's really that's one of the beauty of the text, that it's like a myriad of stuff, so you like it all connects in different ways, because um because we are more free today. We're freer. We have choice, right? But we have choice at the expense of givens. So like even the fact that I can choose to go to Mexico City to like a different campus, like I can choose, that means that living in Cuernavaca, like where I used to live, it's not a given, right? It becomes a choice. And as the gardener say in the text, is choice, it's really really good in some sense, but it's also like really dangerous in another, right? Because you have freedom and you can choose, but then you have to choose everything, right? You have to choose your religion because, as you say, like cosmopolitan and pluralism. Like if I lived in Mexico like I don't know 100 years ago, I would just like my neighbors would be Catholic and I would be Catholic and I wouldn't have to question my faith, right? But then like I know that Islam exists and like Buddhism and like all this other stuff, and then like this like New Age movement, like, and you have to actually choose, like you have to assert your faith, right? But also you have to like to choose where you live, like, and before you could feel trapped. I underlined that part of the text. You could feel trapped in a place, but you didn't feel regretful because you didn't choose it, right? Like you, if you choose to live in a city and you don't feel happy, that's falls upon you, right? Because you have that choice, that freedom to choose. And I think, and that's just like in the personal setting, like where your religion, where to live, but it also happens that, surprise, surprise, like most of our institutions were built upon these foundations of givens, right? Of that Christianity is inherently good, for example, or like because or like you have to respect like your community, or like these like institutions, like politics, like the legal system, all, even democracy in itself, it only works if you believe in it, and for you to truly believe in it, you don't have to think about it. It has to be a given that it's like an inherently good thing. So if like everything becomes a choice, then you have to choose to believe in these systems, but you are so disenchanted, so disillusioned that you cannot really anymore, and it starts to um scale down all the way to like all the social systems breaking, right? Because if and that's the weird thing, that if you really think about it, it's true. But if you really think about it, it breaks down, because what is like a legal system, a court system? It's just like people like sitting and making decrees and like standing up. It's almost like you could almost see it as a game, right? Like it's almost a game that like all society chose to play, like because like it was beneficial for society at the large. But you can see that it only works if you believe in it, right? Because you only if you believe what the judge is saying, but also believe what also in the text they also mention trust. You don't extend trust anymore, because like you and because you it's almost as if you picked outside of the veil, and you see like everything is becoming a choice, nothing is a given anymore, even the institutions. And then you're like, okay, so how do we go about it? And so you cannot really trust the system, like the even like whatever system we choose. And it becomes weird, because then you're like, even if you wanted to extend trust, like you it's difficult because it resides within you. Because, for example, if you think all the whole system is corrupt, like nothing they do can prove otherwise, right? So, because if you think politicians are like bad people, like they are always corrupt, they steal, they don't have the best interest of people at heart. If they build a park, if they make new roads, you can always say like, oh, they are only doing this to atone for past mistakes, or they are only doing this so I vote for them again and they can steal more. Like nothing the other person does can make you forgive them. For me, it was just like a really powerful idea of the
Mhm.
text, and obviously it applies like to personal relationships, but also like institutions as large. Like no, like nothing that they ever do is going to be enough. It like the whole power resides in me for to forgive them, to trust them, and that's like a huge responsibility, a huge weight, and also like a huge power, and it's dangerous because like maybe I like I'm not like I won't ever forgive them, not because it wouldn't be good for me to do so, because I'm not able to, because I didn't go to the process of becoming a person that could hold that rigor in my hands. So yeah, that's the and well, and if all institutions are falling down, if everything is a choice, you are so have so many you have a very big existential anxiety. Like it becomes so satisfying, so peaceful when someone says like, no, this is it, right? Like like something totalitarian, like, no, this is it. And it may be good or maybe bad, but there's like a such a like a peace and comfort, but not knowing that someone tells you like, no, this is it, it's like this is what we're going to do. And you can like finally, okay, like, and that's why it becomes really appealing, like totalitarianism. But that obviously, as we've seen in history ways, that's like it doesn't end well, and it's not the most it gives you peace, but like the at what cost, and it never ends well. So there are some other possible things that we can do to achieve this type of peace without resorting to um totalitarianism that are hinted at through a text, because and that sounds nice because dictators are bad people. So yeah, I don't
You know, dictators are bad people. Is that the conclusion of the conversation? Yeah.
know.
What you're saying though, Emilio, so like, it's kind of riff on points about the book, right? The idea of thoughtlessness, right? So the like
Mhm.
givens and thoughtlessness and trust. What I mean by that is like I actually remember this from Game of Thrones. There's a line I think where the elder Lannister is talking to the king, the Brat King, and he's like, "I'm the king. You gotta do what I say." And the elder Lannister is saying to the king, anytime a king has to say, "I am the king," he's not the king. He's making it explicit. Power a lot of times works implicitly. It doesn't work when it's made explicit. Trust works exactly the same way, in a sense that trust, once it becomes an issue of contention, of awareness, that can then be mediated and put anxiety over it. That's it. The game's already over. It's done before it even began because of that point. No different than a leader who basically pushes their weight with their title. It's an empty title because it has no force because he had to bring it to the explicit and not the implicit. I say this because and there's an account of Robert Moses, the architect, basically urban planner architect. Um, he's famed for these great buildings on Long Island, these great parks. That system, he then became basically the head of parks in New York City. He tried to put that system that worked with those givens on Long Island at those parks in that context in New York City parks. Totally didn't work
Yeah.
because all the givens of wilderness beaches, very well-to-do area, all these givens, very low population density. No one lived on that island, like on those park areas, versus in New York City, people are actually living there, high population density, wildly diverse group of people, lower economic status, et cetera, et cetera. So you get things like basically perverts basically camping out behind the shrubbery, for example, staring at the kids. I know, like really, exactly. Homeless people sleeping in the tube playpen areas, people defecating, et cetera. So like all these things, and then what ends up happening? All those things had to get removed. So eventually, just a piece of concrete slabs, like it's very unwelcome. Like the entire ethos of the Robert Moses urban planning of a very beautiful and aesthetic and pleasant and dignified, basically, kind of a humanizing episode, were all stripped away because the givens were completely different. As I'm meditating on. So that's just on physical objects. That's true. Can you imagine for our souls and how we organize society? It's exactly the same protocol. We're always relying on givens that we don't really realize we're relying on until there's a rupture, until there's some kind of breaking of what was on not taking was taken for granted, or Daniel, the gardeners talk about it, the Heidegger kind of uh broken tool and metaphor, right? That basically you don't notice the hammer until it's broken. It's just an extension of yourself. That kind of thinking. So your notes are making me think about those points related to trust. And actually, on that note, the one thing, because there's this great chapter about Freud with dreams, QAnon with conspiracy theories, which is basically collective hypnosis or delusion / mobs. And then cinema. He talks about all three of those in the chapter. And I put a note in there. I was like, oh, trust is suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really, I think that's actually like we know about what we're talking about here. Because I think there's still trust in the world. There is. It's just not, it's just that in the face of this kind of rampant, almost, I call it the acid of modernity, of modern skepticism, where all belief systems have to be put under the rubric of reason, of the lineage of reason, and it doesn't pass the muster of incredulity. Boom, it gets blown out as not legitimate. Uh, and then once that happens, you destroyed now, like what I just said. Once trust becomes explicit or becomes in play as an explicit contention, that's it. The game's already over. You already lost. Just like power, once a title's put in front of someone, it's already over. If you had power, you wouldn't even have to put the name. You wouldn't have to put your name out there, your title in front of that person. No different with trust. I'm bringing this up but there are cases where we see trust in play as suspension of disbelief in dreams, in mobs, basically things like QAnon, for example, conspiracy theory activity, and cinema. These are all things people take. We suspend our disbelief, which is basically it's almost the atheist mode of like not believing, a lack of belief in God. So it's kind of annoying in that same mode. It reminds me of that. And I put a note in my review I posted up about the book. I made a comment like, I want more of that. I think that mechanism is crazy. Like that's insane. Like that's a very unusual state to be in.
Yeah.
And it's basically acting as a mode of coordination. Like basically, here's the thing: when you don't have first principles in common, you have all this scatterness, all this no givens. So how are you going to coordinate activity that holds anyone together? I think they kind of have an answer. They kind of are giving an answer a little bit. You know, they only talk about that for like 2 chapters. So I said in my review, I was like, I wish there was more, because there's something there. There's something big going on there. Because in theory, because it's not like these trends we're talking about hasn't been around for about 100 years. They have. They're more extreme now, but it's the same protocol. The only difference is basically what was once the upper classes problems have become now aggregate to everybody.
Yeah.
I've had to summarize what the Islanders are arguing too. But the basic dynamic is still in play. So I'm just meditating on like this whole pretense of trust as this suspension disbelief, and this kind of point, where do we see trust not put into question? And we see that kind of play out in modes like dreams, mobs, conspiracy theories, and cinema, where people are going into these states of active suspension of disbelief, at least enough to entertain the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's some really good points. And I think that like trust in a way, well, I think you can have different types of trust, right? Because you can have like a logical trust that maybe we could argue is not trust, just living, as the gardeners say. But like if you logically know something to be true, you can trust it. But then like maybe it's not trust. But if you trust something that may or may not make sense, I think that's where like the real powers comes in. Because as you say, like nowadays we are so logical, we don't even realize, like for example, you have to justify everything, you have to justify the existence via logic for it to be made valid, right? You cannot say like I feel like it. No, you could say like no, you have to make like a logical explanation of why, I don't know, like your religion is the best one, or this economic system is the best one, or this political system. Like you always have to have like a logical reasoning. But the thing is that logic is like a really powerful tool. Like it has made us achieve like amazing things, but like it's just a tool and it has its limits. And I think we, in the fun of like deconstruction and just like like of cynicism and just like breaking it all down with logic. And the funny thing is that you break it all down and it's true. Like maybe this doesn't make sense, like this falls away if you like look at it. But like if you take a step back, like what's the point of like everything crashing down, right? Like you might be right, but you're like miserable and being right. And almost and we it's not inherently obvious, but there are some like the whole world is based on like some things that are illogical, like you cannot base them, like even mathematics itself. Like if you like mathematics works if you take by presupposition like certain axioms. If you take those for granted, you can build the whole mathematics. You cannot prove those axioms with the mathematics they give. And this was like proven with like the Turing machine, and like it's like they don't have completeness, they don't have like these other like 3 qualities that they need. So like mathematics like itself only works because you take like 5 things as givens, you know, and only because you have these 5 givens you can build on top of that everything. So like maybe you can say like, I don't know, like I think that treating like killing people is bad, let's say, like, and how can you justify that? Like you can go into like these like moral arguments and stuff, but if you just take that as a given, as by definition something that you, not that you don't question, but you just assume to, you give the benefit of the doubt of being true, then you can build like things on top, right? And so you have to trust like something and beyond reason, because like logic is not the correct tool to assess those situations, right? It's not it doesn't go that far. It cannot go that far. It's limited in the sense as all tools are. And what you said about dreams and like the mobs and stuff, like you a suspension of disbelief, and there's like this whole chapter of the trance of believability. Sorry, and it's interesting because like you like, and almost like in there's this trance to it, this unconscious aspect to it, and that's I think that like one of really powerful thing. And if it's unconscious, you cannot apply like logic to it, because like it's running in the background, right? You cannot take it out and analyze and see if all the pieces fit. So I think like more it's weird to accept, because not just maybe one of the things that come to light when we see this that word, sorry, and the movies and everything like that, is that um we go into, I don't know how to name it, like an emotional realm that we have to be, and but it's scary, right? Because we don't have this shield, this sword that we have crafted like perfectly to ourselves called logic. We don't have these tools that make that we know how to operate so well. So we have to go to a place of emotion and just say like this. I'm going to take this as a given, and that takes courage and choice, and it's illogical, so it's really hard to do. And that's maybe also like as a tangent why love is so tricky, because it's not logical and we're not used to deal with that, because everything it's so that's one of the few spaces that we can encounter this thing, and we bang ourselves through the to the wall, like just trying to figure it out. And that maybe, as you said, like maybe the glimmer of like the possible not solution, but like a way to address the problem, as the language of the book would say. and and it and this problem was not like, we didn't just choose, funny enough, we didn't choose to have this problem. It was almost like it was necessary for us to question our givens, because if we are Christian and we met a Muslim, like for us to coexist, we have to take our givens not for granted anymore, and we have to analyze them and see how we can like operate with each other, right? So like this age of pluralism just forced us to like take into like to analyze our givens, and we like, but we weren't really ready for that, so we just like fell into this whole like deep existential thing. And funny enough, one of like the last um paragraphs of the book, before getting to like the 100 pages book and notes, just one of the final notes that I found really interesting is that like we know how to belong again. We know like the old ways of belonging, right? We can go to totalitarianism. We can go and like, I don't know, be xenophobic, and that can be was like a belonging to our country. Like we already knows though how can we belong again? Like we already know those ways of belonging, right? But the thing is that we don't want those, because we have seen all the bad things about them, all the painful things. So we want a new way of belonging that's like more attuned to more humane, more good, beautiful, and truthful. And that's our resistance, right? That's our tension nowadays. And for me, it was really cool because I think they mentioned it explicitly, that maybe that's the way for us to have meaning right now, is for us that we are in despair because of our existential crisis, because our system, our trust, and everything is broken down. We have like an easy way to return to something, but we know that way is not the best one, so we are trying to strive for a new one, and that in itself bring us like meaning in that strife, in that search for. And also I don't know if belonging again, but like if we find ourselves like in a way where all of us like in this together, so you could say like that maybe brings some some peace to the whole like problem. But yeah, those are just like the thoughts that came up.
Yeah, the meditating on what you're saying, right? There's a note a lot. Daniel and Michelle spend multiple chapters, specifically in Belonging Again, like in the main titular section of the book. And by the way, anyone's watching this, heads up, this book is basically three parts. I call it a prelude, a prelude, then the actual Belonging Again, the actual text itself, then and basically a conclusion of two chapters, I would say. The majority of it being Belonging Again. Belonging Again is like 200 pages itself. And within there, multiple times in sections of it, there's a meditation between um, basically the worlds of a banality of evil, right, with Hitler's, right. So the Hitler banality evil side, and the Protestant, I forgot his name, something with a B, the Protestant who stays in Nazi Germany and gets killed as a result of it. Basically, that in the world of in the prior world before the current state of we can't do xenophobia, we can't do all these ways of belonging again. This led to an opportunity of heroes and villains, right? We had the option to do good or do evil, right? We could ascend to excellence or we can fall down to baseness. We had that option. And basically by the time we got to World War II, we just got to a complete disaster when that happened. So there's multiple sections where the gardeners are sitting there going, well, okay, the way we build a society right now with all these dynamics we talked about, yeah, there's a lot of bad, but it kind of neuters us. We can't even harm ourselves anymore. And they're saying maybe that's what's okay. And maybe it's okay we don't have excellent people anymore of a moral domain because there's no crisis for them to answer to. But likewise, there's no villains that cause the crisis. So we're fine. I don't think the gardeners actually believe that, but they are sitting there for multiple sections to work through that point. Because that is ultimately what happens here. What are you going to do? You're going to get a strong man who's going to do an autocratic, basically top-down crush on the difference of reality and just say, nope, this is it. And you're going to give emotional stability for everybody involved at the expense of probably getting people killed. That's what tends to happen with these kind of behaviors. That's what tends to happen. Or we're going to just basically die out from a kind of, I always forget, it's like certain South African native tribes, or was it North American? I forgot which one. South American, North American, where they got exposed to Western culture and their gods and society all collapsed. And basically they died out within a generation. Like the people literally stopped farming, like they stopped hunting because they saw no point. It was like radical anomie, suicide, depression, basically. No one likes to talk about this, but it is true in the West, at least in the United States. We have rampant drug abuse, accidental suicide, overdoses. We are a very unhealthy society, if you look at it from a populational point of view. What is to be done with all this? That's basically the question. I think it's kind of the gardeners don't state those statistics I'm saying out loud, but they are certainly addressing the basic question of basically if we've numbed out our reality, we've numbed out by basically getting us cosmopolitans indifference, literally a position of indifference in society and how we orient ourselves. All our needs are satisfied, the markets work, everything's copacetic. Do we need? Is this actually the optimal situation? Is this like who said it? Spinoza. Basically, is this the best possible world? Is that what we're going to get? There is a lot of, I like to say, meditating on that point. I think their conclusion is no, we can do better. But as you said, Emilio, they're definitely setting up the case at the end of the book to say we had answers for how to belong. Those aren't going to work anymore. So we got to do something else. And that's basically the setup for part 2 of the book.
Yeah, we'll just have to wait 10 more years. So it's going to be.
I know, right? I don't think it's going to be very extraordinary. The problem with any philosophy text is they're usually very good at diagnosis. Excellent. They're excellent at it.
Yeah.
Prognosis, that is a very huge mountain to climb. Gigantic. I mean, I've heard one too many Marxists who made a comment that basically co-ops and communes were going to be the answer to the society problems. And I don't know, dog. I don't think it works that way. And actually, they kind of riff on that point because again, Marxist critiques have a certain validity. I can't sit here and say no, they have no validity in their arguments. The problem is when they then try to address it with not diagnosis, but with prognosis, what to do with it, and how to intervene, their models are not taking into account enough systems, enough components of self-interest, human
Yeah.
nature, etc., that limits the effectiveness of their interventions or their proposals. So I think that is I did make a comment, as I said in my review for the book, I did say, the discussion of status. And actually, I didn't talk about this. I said that I wanted to talk more about basically these apparatus of social
Mm.
coordination based on dreams, conspiracy theories, and cinema.
Mhm.
The next tangent about that, this is on a private note I'm going to send to the Garners later. It's the apparatus of status. Like society still
Mm.
have status.
Yeah.
It still happens. And I don't think belonging again without any context of status, of association, and how that's going to be oriented. And I say this because in the Supreme Court, recently there was a case called 303 Creative, which basically had a question of a graphic designer wanted clearance or understanding if the laws in Colorado would require her to make, she's a Christian, require her to make gay wedding websites. So she wanted
Mm.
adjudicated in the courts. And it got up to the Supreme Court and they concluded no, that the graphic designer is not obligated. So that's a great example. And the argument that the dissenting side said no about why that graphic designer should be compelled to do the website was an argument of dignity. It cites a case from Atlanta Motel versus United States in 1968, I believe. And the argument is about human dignity, and that's attached directly to status. So this apparatus of dignity, status, and virtue kind of all playing with each other. And actually, I was meditating on this because me and Daniel have a lot of conversations about virtue. I love the topic, but I would be the first to tell you it's a anemic concept.
Mm.
It's exactly when we talk about this concept of the old belief systems having no force, like all religious beliefs having no force in discourse. It doesn't have the same kind of compelling force of, say, uh, like a BLM kind of issue, like an icon of that. Like that has emotional energy. You bring that term up, like
Mhm.
I'm blanking their names, but you bring one of those names up, you have this emotional power
Yeah.
behind this. Uh, that is absent. And virtue has the same problem. And I would make the arguments because it's been neutered. Like basically, traditional virtue ethics
Mm.
and the entire conceptions behind it have been neutered, completely nuked, hollowed out.
Mhm.
And the attempt to use dignity to try to replace it is a symptom and sign of that fact. And it's not doing the work everyone thinks it does when we try and use that term dignity. And then, by the way, like I was in other groups, like I was in a Heidegger discussion group with Johannes' Helicon group. And I made a comment about related to, okay, but basically when Heidegger's making these arguments on Dasein and the revealing of Aletheia, um, and specifically the dangers of technology, like I'm getting what he's saying with all this. I understand and I agree with
Mhm.
everything he's saying. But I think you were in the group with us, actually. I think you were with me in that group. Um, I basically said, okay, but like, why? Why does it matter
Mm.
that the river becomes a dammed up, gets dammed up, and becomes a turbine source versus just being allowed to be a river? Like, what's the difference from a high, if you don't believe if there's no essence to things, that they have a certain, and the answer I was given back when I made this case to the group was, oh, well, things have dignity. They have a certain dignity.
Mm.
So that we see people using this term to try to do a lot of work, what essence would do, or uh,
Mm.
kind of unbreachable domain or unbreachable boundary that needs to be protected. Uh, so that's why I'm bringing this up, is that I see a similar play that I think this apparatus is going to need to be discussed to answer that question of belonging again, because people are status driven. That is a totally a fact. We organize societies based on status. Many people do, and many of our economic and personal decisions are based on status. And again, status is always a fun thing because
Mm.
it's an implicit thing that's never actually
Mm.
stated explicitly. But if you talked about it, you could address it. It can't be talked about. It just never usually is. It's just taken as a given. So that's why I bring this up. I would say, I think the gardeners do need to investigate that if they really want a robust prognosis of how to belong again. Because I think that's not, unless that's addressed, I think they may falter what because their account's great. I just think that's a missing. I do believe that it is a mechanism that needs to be explored more, in personal opinion.
Yeah, and when you were saying all this, it's interesting because like for you, we've looked at the maybe like the systems or like the like communal aspect, but for you to belong, we have to take into account like the specifics of the individual in the sense that it's not the same belonging for like an 8-year-old to like a 20 to an 80-year-old, like that belonging again or belonging somewhere, it's really different depending on who you are, what is your age, what is your gender, what like all these different characteristics. And like when you said dignity, like for me, it came to mind like the dignity of children. Like nowadays, we don't like they don't belong somewhere because we don't know where to put them, where to place them, because like many years ago, like you could have like 11, 12 years old and be an apprentice of someone, right? And you were actually doing something, you were interacting with the world, like you belong somewhere and you could interact, you have meaning, because the meaning crisis and belonging again, I think like are like really close subjects. So you belong somewhere, you have meaning, and you were actually contributing to society. Nowadays, like children like go to school and they are like divorced from like reality and how the world works. We just like we give them stuff to do and no way to interact. And well, that's like really damaging psychologically, I think. But like even without delving into that, it's just I think more of this symptom of like everything fell down. We don't belong anymore. We don't meaning, and then you could say that argument like, okay, we have to give them dignity, right? Because it's like the shorthand for like all these things that maybe we don't have the force to use them anymore with other words. So I think it's going to be interesting, as you say, as the diagnosis is like really thorough and it delves into all this and like the actions they will recommend for us to belong again in like a better way. As you say, that have to take into account like the dignity, the status, and everything like that, and it's going to be interesting. So yeah, it's and well and just like a question, and also as with everything, it's not equally distributed in the sense that, for example, like I'm fortunate enough that I can move to another city to study, so that's and my friends also. So we have like this, we disperse, like we like as we say, like we don't have a physical space anymore. Like you don't belong, even if you belong somewhere, like that place becomes like dispersed, so like you don't, so it becomes weird. But like for example, I know certain people usually of lower income that they stay in a specific community or a specific local, so maybe their experience of like belonging again or belonging is not as critical as other people, because like they may suffer like from other problems, but like they do belong somewhere, right? So even in that sense, like it's not equal to everyone. Like and I bring this up because like there were some parts of the text that jumped out to me and I was like, no, like in the sense that like I let's see if I can quickly find it, but like there was like this part that they said like we all feel, I don't know, and they say like something like I don't remember quite like for example, like nothing feels real. Even what is real and what doesn't feel actual is what which we always have reason to question, for example. And I was like this, and I was like, no, like for example, my friends feel real. Like I feel fortunate enough that I used to have like um maybe like a bigger meaning crisis and related to belonging again, or belonging. But like I feel that there are some ways that you can actually like cope with problem, and even if you're high status, low status, high income, low income, there are like some things that maybe are givens that you don't question, or maybe something that just situations that happen that alleviate the existential anxiety of not belonging, because like maybe it's a spectrum, right? You belong more or you belong less, and so that's also like
Look,
really
I mean,
interesting.
Emilio, to build on what you're saying,
Yeah.
like on this point of unequal distribution, it's totally true. Um, as one note is, yes, I would agree. The stats about like basically lower economic status people tend not to travel as much. That's definitely true. But like I said, the corollary argument is marriage is much more common with wealth, with higher economic status than poor. It's actually the poor that are in the United States. That's the stats I can quote from, that are actually way more commonly not married now. Marriage has become a luxury item. Basically, if you have a basic PhD, doctorate, and masters, even a bachelor's now, but that masters up, they're all married. Basically, they're married and stay married. Super fascinating. All the divorce and not marriage at all is all basically below bachelor's level, and lower economic status in the United States. So marriage has become basically a luxury good product as a social indicator. So even though the poor may not be traveling, they got basically divorced and having kids out of wedlock. So they don't have that structuring force of belonging again that for up until the 1950s, the United States was a uniform instrument that was accessible to all people, regardless of their economic status.
That's a really good point, because maybe they, for example, they do know their neighbors, so they belong in the sense that they belong in that community, that neighborhood. But as you say, that even if we can think that, okay, maybe they are not that affected, like they have belong in that sense, but they don't have like a family structure to belong to, right? So it's like even like we are all affected, but in different ways, at different degrees, and and that's really fascinating. And to take that into account when you make the recommendations are like key, right? Because something that might help that might help someone belong if they, for example, need a family structure, might be different than from like a community or neighborhood wise. So it's going to be that there's a subtle distinction, or maybe not so subtle, that is important to take note. And the statistics, well, just and just like a quick side note is that, like, normally, like the thing of marriage, I've read about it before, and it's interesting because like it's almost like fashions, because like way before, like if you had like expensive clothes, like the normal people couldn't wear it, so that was your distinction. But now you can wear, or almost like you can be like poor or rich, and you can wear the same clothes. So what was how can you distinguish your status? It was by adopting costly beliefs, like for example polyamory and stuff. Like that was like a really like a costly belief, but you could like make it work if you had enough of an income. And you could say like there was like this phase of like polyamory, it trickled down to like the society, and then like the rich people were like, nah, it's better to be married, and they stayed married, right? So that's like just like a quick side note, that it's also like a really interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, so that plays into what we're talking about here. This mechanisms of status being signified. Yeah, and basically beliefs are actually like, there's I think Rob Henderson is his name. I'm vaguely remembering. He coined the term luxury beliefs on exactly that predication. That certain beliefs being stated, they used to be used to wear clothing or do actions that signified your status. Now it's belief systems, or at least that's one mode of indicating it. I think that's a very valid.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, I think if someone is watching this, they probably maybe have already read the book, but we can encourage them to read it again, because it's really fascinating, and you might find certain piece in the problem being explained to you, and you might like also feel this feeling that they place into words what you feel, and that's like in itself like a useful and feeling to have, or like to see reflected on the world. And yeah, I don't know, anything else you want to say about the book?
No, in general, I mean, I talk to the gardeners all the time. So basically, it's like reading a book. Is basically their writing style is very good. It's very much in their prose writing is like having a conversation with them. So I think that's really powerful, because that's generally a very pleasant reading experience when that's the case. So I think that's really great. I think the other note is, I think the gardeners are also very generous, that almost all these texts are online on our YouTube channel too. So basically, like the philosophical experience of the gardeners is available to you in multiple modes, and not just in the book itself. And Sam, thank you for joining in.
Hi, sorry I couldn't join on
Nice.
time. I was having trouble with the link. I thought it was the same one.
Yeah, no, it's
So,
okay.
Okay.
So
Here.
we're actually just wrapping it up a little bit, but you know what? We were just reflecting on since you're joining here, Sam. I mean, I think a big note actually Amelia brought up too is that he said he read this text and saw things about his own life being
oh,
told through the diagnostic of the text.
yeah.
I know you made a comment about that on Twitter, so I mentioned that to Emilio, so
Yeah.
you're here. So jump in.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, okay, I'll get a little personal, but during reading, I had planned a vacation with a friend, and my friend bailed last minute, and we had a tense conversation, and I just found myself like unable to speak. And then later that night, and I love when this kind of thing happens where what you're reading sort of like lines up with your own life. I read the bit on meta mentality, and I really felt like, oh yeah, this is actually a huge source of just a really small little problem that I'm having on the day to day, where I didn't feel like she trusted what that I was truly like explaining what was going on in my head. There was this constant like, I don't know if what you're saying is what you're thinking kind of thing. And I think as a result, I couldn't speak because I felt like without that extension of trust, that nothing I could say would be of sufficient proof, which they talk about in the chapter on meta mentality and also trust. And I found like those two sections for me, it was really introspective and very like lived. And I really liked that. Like it's nice when you can see the reflections of kind of like at scale issues, just like in your own life. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I think it's like a really good testament to how like good the writing and the topics are, because like of course they have a lot of like academic and philosophical rigor, but you can connect to them in like a really like personal day-to-day way, which I think it's really really cool, because sometimes like philosophy in general it's useful, but you have to kind of fight with it a little bit to bring that down to day to day. But yeah, I also had a similar experience reading the book. I read some parts and I was like, this is placing towards what I was feeling, thinking without knowing. So it was a really nice experience also.
Yeah. Again, that's as Emilio said, that's a great testimony of great writing. And as well as you said, Sam, right, is that this is not just abstractional philosophy just kind of floating in the air. It's actually just our feet are on the ground in a lived experience. So that means that's probably, I think, honestly, for a philosophy text, as I wrote in the summary, besides lucid writing, like kind of having a compelling argumentation like this is probably the best compliment I can give to a philosophy text. So I highly recommend anyone checking it out.
Yeah. Yeah. In that sense, I really felt like it was backed by a lot of strong research and references, but you didn't necessarily need to like be that familiar with many of the references because it was brought down to earth so well that regardless, you would have the full comprehension, I felt, through anecdotes, through examples, without needing to know, the entire oeuvre of Kant or something like that.
Yes, and by the
Of
way, this
which I'm
seems like
not familiar.
exactly. There was like a tour de force. Like basically, I think anyone
Yeah.
reading this text, there'll be at least one philosopher mentioned or sociologist mentioned that you did not have knowledge in. That was totally the case. Yes, that was totally the case. But again, another testimony of the greatness of the writing is that they're able to, by summarization and kind of talking it through very systematically and groundedly, you can understand it without having to be a PhD in Kant or Hegel, especially Hegel. Hegel's a big mess for me. Yeah, so again, I agree with you 100%, Sam, about that point.
Yeah, on that point too, I really liked the way that different thinkers were sort of brought in communication with one another and how liberally that was employed. Like, you have citation of, some core philosophers, but also some interesting sociologists that I haven't necessarily heard of, and then also like Samuel Barnes, who is a contemporary. And yeah, that I thought that was really nice. It's very, very of the moment in that way, but really strongly so because it has such a depth behind it. Yeah, depth of tradition.
Swimming in the tradition. It's like going for a nice swim in the pool.
Yeah.
Not
He's
full
on the
swim.
surface, but he's got the whole ocean beneath him.
I like that.
The reader. Yeah. Sorry, Emilio?
No, I was going to say that's a really good point. Just I think that maybe that's part of the magic, that like normal academic, like you can only mix this with this, and this is just like no, like everything comes together and it's beautiful and it's useful. So yeah, it's a really good read.
Yeah, it's not stultified. There's many academic texts I read that are literally just a piece of a jigsaw puzzle of a predefined limitation. Like this is Wittgenstein's conversation about private language, and this is how it's speaking to this academic, and then this network relationship. It's like you can already see all the plannings. Like you can see exactly where it's supposed to fit in the academic infrastructure. This book is very not like that. It is a much more fluid. I said in my summary, my review on Amazon, it's basically he's having a conversation with these authors, and you're happen to be part of the conversation. You're like overhearing the conversation.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think by not creating a tight little like hermetically sealed argument that only fits inside of like one corner of a discussion that's being had only primarily in institutions, by resisting that urge, it makes it a lot more useful for an everyday person. And I think that's also like why my experience moving through the text was more personal than heady, you know, because it had that usefulness just to lived life. Yeah.
Talking about common life.
Yeah. True that.
Yeah. Well, and also I think it's also just as you said, like it's not heavy. And also like it's not an academic piece. It's almost like conversations that we are part of. That we a space that we may belong again to these conversations that are really powerful. So yeah, and also like we will also like talking about that. Like these takes is like diagnosis and like a really thorough diagnosis, but we were hopeful that like and also like there are hints of the possible proposal of how to address this. But like, did you get any of the by reading the book, Sam, did you like find that there were any hints like coming up of like, oh, this might be like a way to belong again in like a better way, right? Not like sidestepping like totalitarianism and all these other nasty stuff.
Yeah. I'm trying to think, you know, again, I think I'm just drawn to like interpersonal moments in my life when I ponder that. Yeah, like I think there's a bit where he talks about how like culture is so much deeper than just your food and stuff like that. But then I think also of like, I don't know, like my roommate in first year, and she's a great friend, and from Chennai teaching me how to cook, and just the ways that it's so, yeah, it runs so much deeper than just like a discussion about tolerance in like a frenetic and kind of atomized world. Like you need something that is more deep than just like a super egoic structure you need to transform, rather than just like manage, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
maybe that's vague, but
no, but it makes sense, and I think it alludes to some of the things that we were talking about. Like because as you said, like something deeper, something, it's just not like purely logical or purely intellectual, just like something that's like maybe illogical and more emotional, and just like that grounds the whole thing. So yeah, I think that may be one of the hints of the ways we can possibly belong again. So yeah, that's a really good view. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I got someone was asking me questions at the window over here. So I apologize. And then I realized I was not on mute for a second. I was like, oh wait, I gotta mute myself.
Yeah.
Anyways, no, Sam, so what you're saying, I brought it up to Emilio, right?
Yeah.
The thrust of idea of trust as suspension of disbelief.
Mhm.
So kind of a kind of clearing out so you can even give space to allow for opportunities to show up. That's what I'm hearing a little bit of this,
Yeah.
what you're talking about. Because kind of like anytime Emilio brought this up before. Actually, well, Emilio was quoting it from the text about this. Anytime that trust is lost and it's actively aware it's lost, it's almost impossible to get it back. Because
Yeah.
being made explicit, trust only works when it's unexplicit. It's on thought. It's
Mhm.
not thought about. It only works in the background. Once you force into the foreground of apprehension and discussion, that's it. It becomes basically a guaranteed disaster. And your
Yeah.
colleague in your discussion with your friend, where she was like meta analyzing you and basically saying like, I don't trust what you're saying. It's the actual content. You have more to say.
Mhm.
It's actually another mode of that where you actually end up getting silenced because you felt like I have nothing to tell you. Like nothing I'm going to tell you is going to satisfy that you think I'm being honest with you.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then you kind of have those similar relations between like strangers in really vague and weird ways when there are larger superstructures that are imposing that sort of lack of trust upon your like just your everyday meeting of people in public space. You know, um, you know, when you have when when you take things from the realm of trust and you transfer them into the realm of law, it becomes like less trusting. We need to be careful. I felt that was a really wise point of the book was being careful of what areas of our life belong to what thrusts of agency. You know, would this be better left to trust or would it be better left to law? Because yeah, you don't want to get into a situation where everyone around you is speaking with preference falsification and you don't feel like everything feels a sham, you know?
Yeah, like and what you said is like it's at some point, and because like in when you said in your example, like it's on an individual level because you think you think I think you think, right, like
Yeah.
the whole thing that's going, and it like it never stops. But it also like it, and you said like your friend like had the whole power to like nothing you could say would make her trust you, right? And the same happens with institutions. Like nothing the institution says, nothing the politician says like will make you trust them unless you want to, and that's like a really and but like the conditions don't allow you, or don't make it easy for you to make that choice, and it still becomes a choice. It's not a given anymore. So yeah, it's a whole wrangle and concepts fighting and
Yeah.
clashing together. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like I don't know, we all like reading. That's kind of why we're here, but it's sort of
Yeah.
the difference between skepticism and curiosity can sort of overlap and um one, you know, a skepticism can evolve into a cynicism, which, you know, it really just exists in our head, but then it plays out as an inability to belong, you know, to these larger structures that are dependent on human values such as trust. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's funny because the laws are meant, and one of the purposes of law is to engender trust
Yeah.
so that the community can go through the activities of life. That's the whole pretense of law. At least that's one of my understandings of it. So
Totally.
thus the kind of thrusting energy here is what happened was because the reliance was that common life would have all this trust network or norms, things like that built in, that the law was meant to just kind of give a demarcation, right, of boundingness, so that that those common life activities can proceed forward in an unobstructed way. It's very much, I've always thought this idea of like almost medicine, right? That surgery and other things like medicine, when done right, are supposed to remove privations so that the health can actually come forth. It's not meant to make you healthy. It's just to remove the things that are blocking you from being healthy. Ideally, law should have a similar attitude or position. But what the book is talking about is what's happened is that common life, all the givens from that have been sucked out, extracted. I use that language. I'm a little more strong about it. And it's ended up in more explicit technocratic regulations, protocols, regulations, all these like abstracted, depersonalized protocols of how to organize our lives and how we interact with each other. I mean, just a simple thing. Like, here, I'll give you the story, one account. I had to drop my driver's license for Georgia down here, and I had my New York State license and some other proofs of identity and residence. I show up to the department here in Georgia to do this, and they look at me and go, "No, we can't do this." I'm like, "What? Why not? Doesn't that cover everything?" No, we need you need basically a passport. And I looked at her, I was like, "But wait a minute, you need a passport to show me who I am." And then basically when I pushed her on the points of like, wait a minute, this meets all the requirements that your state needs to know who I am. And eventually I pushed her on the point. What she did, she cited a law code. She literally did a state code. I looked at her, I was like, fascinating. And with the full arrogance, not arrogance, but full confidence of a technocrat that says, well, what are you talking about? The law protocol says X. That's what I'm doing. I'm just following the protocols.
Yeah.
There's no discernment of judgment of a particular moment or the underlying principles behind the protocol. This is what it has to be.
Yeah. You know, I sense like a similar dynamic occurring when we try and move forward into the future with projections, like literal computer projections, rather than like the art of leadership. You know, it's like with leadership, you can confront an unknown and you do it artfully, you know, that's why it requires experience and things like that. But in modern society, we rely more on knowing the future or planning the future or citing the future. And it is just a world of abstractions. At least with the art of leadership, you understand the future as an unknown, and innately so, but we can get really lost inside of the map when we do things like project, claim as truth things which are at best sort of approximate estimations.
Sam, that's excellent. Because thinking of the other part too, is that would you ever go to battle with a statistic?
Yeah.
With a projection? Like, no, but like seriously, because like a leader, because I know it's from reading literature, leadership. It's like, it's less even a question of are you right or wrong? It's that you have the conviction to move forward and respond to the error. And that the whole pretense is that as a leader, your team is saying, I'm going with you. You build enough trust with your team that the leader can say, we're doing X, we're going down this direction. And we'll respond to the outcome that comes from that. What person are going to do that with statistics, with a goddamn projection model? No one. How could you?
Totally. And then when we think about these, about occurrences like this as dynamically unfolding, in the case of a leader who has built a lot of trust with the people who are behind them, even if they are completely wrong, the event will unfurl in a climate of trust. But when you have a dynamic unfolding of something where you don't have that sort of gluten, like that binder of trust, you know, we see it today. There's a plan. It's a really tight, detailed plan, and we can't even execute it because nobody, whether it's right or wrong, at least it's a plan, but nobody trusts it. There's nothing to bind us together on the plan. So there's this insistence that this plan is the only right way to proceed into the future. cultivates an atmosphere of distrust. And so we don't even follow the plan. We just stumble forward. And like, yeah, the dynamic costs of that are evident, you know, like you just can't proceed in any sense of like alignment or coordination in that climate.
Yeah, and it's weird because like in one camp you can be like as you said, Thomas, that like you follow the abstraction a lot like to perfection, like you don't reason like this is the abstraction, this is the protocol, this is the map, this is what is. But on the other hand, if you have too much abstraction, too many processes, like you almost are like screw it, like I don't want to follow any of this abstraction, I'm just going to stumble, and that also is not ideal, right? Like you have a map because it's useful, but if you have like 20 maps within each other, like then you're just, it's as if you have no map, you're just fumbling around. And that happens like in the micro and the micro and the macro scale, because like our current president here in Mexico is just like that. Like there are laws and you cannot, like you have the constitution and he makes laws that contradict the constitution and that you cannot do that, but he's like, anyway, I'm going to, so that he like we see this like in all spheres of like of our existence, right? Like in the macro, in the macro, in like the micro. So it's just, yeah, it's a whole mess. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think this viewing kind of like directly references their concept of the map crisis, right? Like we're all like in these little self-referential maps, and there's so many maps. Again, maybe that's sort of like the way in which they lean on Charles Taylor's work in saying that there's actually like more religiosity than less.
Explosion.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's just this, it's almost like with the advent of computation and the concept of copy and paste ad infinitum, our maps have been copied and pasted ad infinitum, but each with a little glitch.
Yeah.
And that's telling that, because then the question of, actually, this is fascinating because Sam, one of the things I commented when you were in here to Emilio is about one of the things I wish this book needs to talk, I wish this book talked more about was the apparatus of status. Meaning like, why do certain people's maps have more precedence than others?
Yeah.
Why should we pick one map over another map? The answer is status, clearly. And the one mode of legitimacy about that is leadership. A true leader, they're the map, we follow them. We follow them willingly. We in a mode of suspension of disbelief. We're willing to suspend our disbelief for the sake of following the leader.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really good point. I think too, like you can definitely see mechanisms where using like really cheap status signifiers in order to like grab authority for your map, so to follow the metaphor, you know, it creates a system of incentivization where to do that kind of exploitative behavior, it benefits one person, but it again leads to this fragmented, like stumbling into the future where you might like take a bunch of time and energy out of a community for some end which is totally against its welfare. But somehow you've been able to do that, you've been incentivized to do that, and you know, eventually that you would think a map like that would just crumble, but in the meantime it's taken so much energy from the system.
And it's almost like what they warn us in the book, like in a way, like what's like someone that's a dictator, like someone that's like totalitarianism, like you have your map and you have to like impose it in everyone, right? And like if we each of us have our own map, like we can communicate and it's like chaos, anxiety, and someone says like this is the map, right? Like we have a common ground again to belong to, right? But as you say, like this, it's not in the benefit of like communities or like a specific person and stuff. So like the map eventually like crumbles away, and so we just have like a momentary relief. But then we have to face the exact same thing again. So it's just like if we don't escape that cycle, we are trapped in it forever. So yeah.
Yeah, and at least pre-internet, like these systems of totalitarianism, they would have been bound, like kind of geographically. You know, like as you were saying, Thomas, earlier about how the purpose of law was to build trust, not to take it down. That law, that like that sphere of lawfulness was sort of like physically instantiated through cities, then later through nations, geographical borders. And, you know, when those broke down, it was sort of bounded to the area in which they presided. But now you can have a sort of like really strong, really powerful, like map, so to speak, of a world map that like sprinkles its way across the globe just through telecommunications, and you don't really know where it lives, right? So you don't know its effects are rhizomatic, you know, and really difficult to predict. Yeah, it's almost like we tried, in globalizing, we're trying to like give the whole world one map.
One map, one law.
But
Yeah.
if that map is flawed, there's nowhere, there's nothing outside of the globe, you know, like maybe the oceans are the one like lawless zone on the world, you know, but not even really.
That's not even true. That's not even
Yeah.
true, because nation states have extension into bodies of water.
Exactly.
But actually, Sam, you come from an architect background, so obviously this is like an architect kind of top down, just kind of like, here's the plan, no response to any of the geographic conditions, the material cost, the community needs. Nope. Just stamp it on top.
Yeah, I think like the biggest kind of comparison to architecture is that, like, you know, to have good space, you need an interior and you need an exterior, and we've totally like forsaken the exterior. Yeah.
And it's interesting because, as you said, like you have this map, and because we're all connected via like the internet and technology, like it gets like copy pasted like to everywhere, and I think there's no escape. And and one thing that I think we haven't mentioned, but I think it's like once you mention it, Sam, is like it's obvious in the sense that like a big part of the that we're able to experience like pluralism, and we have this clash of givens, and we have all these collapses, and it's because of technology, right? If we were not as connected as before, like we wouldn't face like much of these belonging crisis. But it's also interesting because these like the internet like takes away and gives, because in a way it gives you a way to belong to certain spaces. Like we couldn't be talking right now if the internet didn't exist. So like in that sense, like we have this place to belong, like for example the net, like this virtual space that you can belong to like once a week, right? That wouldn't be possible if not for these spaces. But also because you have internet, you can you're exposed to all these like different ideas, ways of thinking, religion. So like it's so they take away your givens, and they also make it really easy to propagate like a map for everyone. But also like I don't know if there's a fighting chance, but there's a way of you using that technology that can use like a map for everyone to create your own little like maps, but not for yourself, for like a couple of people, right? Like community, and it's interesting, like the dynamics of like the technology of internet, of like radio communications, or everything. I think to a certain extent like are the reason we are in this place. So yeah, it's I haven't like it seems, well, for me so obvious now that you mentioned it, Sam, but I haven't like consciously thought it in this conversation. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that sort of like points back to something that this book is very refreshingly does really well, and it's denying the ultimate good or bad of any one thing. Like this is everything in this book, it just gets framed. We are reminded that we should think in trade-offs, not in absolutes. And that's really nice because yeah, we're often not thinking like that, right? Like as contemporaries.
Yeah.
I do think eventually they're gonna have to put their foot down somewhere. They're gonna have to. But I do agree. Like they are very judicial in
Mhm.
their holding of the accounts. I was talking with Emilio before you got on the call. I was like, at one point they're making comments about, well, basically the society and the way we build ourselves, we basically numbed ourselves from any greatness. We're
Mm.
denied ourselves greatness, but we're also denied basic great evil at the same time.
Mm.
Maybe that's the optimal outcome. Maybe that's what we should do. Also just a whole systematic discussion many times. I mean, in multiple sections of this book about gay marriage and Christianity.
Mhm.
Multiple times, Daniel's making it very clear. Maybe that needs to be negotiated. Maybe that
Mhm.
needs to be swayed out. So I do agree that is refreshing to have moments of someone giving fair adjudication.
Mhm.
But I do think eventually they're going to have to. I think in the diagnostic part, it's where they're going to show. They're going to have to show their hand to say
Yeah.
what their commitments are and what the action move forward is going to be.
Yeah. Well, we still have a second volume, but yeah, that whole, actually, now that you bring it up in that light, it reminds me of one of the first chapters on the death of process. They do not forget the death of process. So they'll go through the adjudication, and yeah, like adjudicating doesn't deny truth. It actually like allows it and opens up
But see,
trust in it.
that's super interesting, right? Because on this discussion of trust and law, right, the whole pretense
Mhm.
of that discussion is that people are not willing to wait. That the
Yeah.
act of waiting
Yeah.
was an act of basically denial.
Mhm. Disbelief.
Very telling point.
Yeah, and I think it's quite charming in the way that the book talks about given and choices, and like as you said, Sam, like there's no given evil or even good. Like everything, it's like a trade-off, it's a choice, right? So I think it's quite fitting within like the themes of the book itself, that they don't say like this is, they don't give you like a specific given to attach yourself to. It's always like it's relative and it's choices, and I think that it's fitting, and yeah, I hadn't realized it in that way, but yeah, you are absolutely right.
There's another comment about that because there was a meditation towards the end of Belonging Again, that section of it, about Freud versus Jung, and saying that Freud basically had a position of we're here to just cope. Like not in a negative sense, but in just a sense of we're just here to mediate the tensions. We're not here to give ultimate answers to these problems. Jung, in the discussion made at that point, is that Jung did try to basically come with a theology to answer the questions of the problem of the self, basically in the soul. So the gardeners are meditating on that point, and maybe that's part of their answer, or they're going to show their hand by saying there is no resolution, no ultimate resolution. There is only addressing and coping. They might come down on that conclusion. I don't know. We'll see what they do in volume 2. I just want to throw it back to the group because I recall them saying that towards the end of the book.
Yeah, the conclusion of part 1, I think.
Yeah, around there. It was towards the back.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's weird because like it's so different than like most things, because for example in Christianity, like you have like a definite end, like you either go to heaven or you go to hell, well, for all eternity, but it's like a definite answer, a definite like place, right? So like as you said, like if there and we have it's weird to me that we have so many secular religious ideas, but like people don't know, like, and as just like Jung is just like he didn't have like the enough courage to call it like theology, right? So so many secular ideas, and because they give you like this definite answer, right? And it's quite sparse, I think, the when they tell you not like no, you just like there's no definite endpoint, you just have to go. And that reminds me of like tantric Buddhism, that they just like basically they say like you will exist forever, like you are condemned to exist, right? Like you will always exist in some capacity or another, and that's like terrifying, right? Because there's no end, there's no definite point. And that way of looking and thinking about reality or about like this type of stuff, it's like a whole different thought process. So I think you can arrive at really interesting places because it's so different from like all the other like ways we went to a conclusion. So it's going to be really interesting, as you say, when they write book 2 of Belonging Again.
Yeah, they're working on it right now, right?
I
Let's
mean, they
hope,
were
yeah.
writing this
Yeah.
book from 2013. They were writing Longing Again, part
Yeah.
one. I
Really
But
don't
sad.
know if that meant part two as well.
oh, I thought it was in the works. Granted, we may wait a while, but I got time.
We got time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully we're all here like 10 years into the future. Like the
Yeah,
systems
God
have
willing.
not collapsed yet. Yeah.
You know, or we don't go ourselves.
Yeah.
But on that note, we should listen. Want to wrap it up, everybody? Do a round closing notes, closing remarks.
Yeah. Um, Closing remarks. I mean, just as I don't know, I think I would just give a recommendation. I think I would like to end where I started, which reading this was, it really touched my life. And that is probably the best recommendation you could give for any book, because why else read it, right? And it satisfies that big why really effectively. And for that reason, I think people should pick up a copy.
Well said. Emilio, any last words?
Um, yeah, just like it on a similar vein that I think that people that have like a philosophical background, of course, are going to really appreciate, enjoy, and get usefulness out of the book. But also, if you've never heard like of a philosophy book before, I think like you can still read this and find like immense value, because it's one of my favorite essays of the Garners are like ideas are practically ice. So like if you pick this up, you will get like new glasses and you can see through the actual like modern times, and you will see like you will be able to see what's happening, and just like knowing and being able to see and understand what's happening in itself is so useful, because you're not just stumbling in the dark, just like wondering what's happening. You like with these concepts, with these ideas, you can actually see. And I think I would invite people to see and to read the book, because it's really great. Yeah.
These are great closing comments. This is fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I said at the beginning of this class, as Sam said, I'll end as I begin by saying I think the Garners are a great gift to the online philosophy community.
Mhm.
I think the space is warmer, kinder, more rigorous, and more inventive and charming because the Gardeners are part of the online community. And I have to really thank them. And in fact, the service of us reading this book together, right, and doing the surprise recording review is to show a little sign of gratitude and appreciation for what the Gardeners do for all of us individually, as well as the group of people interested in philosophy, right, regardless of our diverse backgrounds and interests and priorities. So I want to thank the Garners again for all their great work, both in the text itself, as generated by this discussion. You know, a book is great when it has good ideas that can riff off in conversation. That's a good sign right there. Help with lived experience, and also just bring people together as literally to, dare I say, belong again.
That's
All right, Emilio, cut the recording.